Well, welcome back, Global Health students. I wanted to begin this section of Module 2 with a review of our last driver, which was climate change. So we, in the last segment, linked climate change to the 5 other drivers. And I'll just reiterate once again, climate change affects the amount and patterns of precipitation, which can lead to floods and droughts. Too much rain will increase exposure to diarrhea diseases. Too little increases respiratory diseases. And environmental degradation causes climate change. Climate change leads to population migration, such as the climate change refugees we discussed earlier in Bangladesh. And the relationship between climate change and environmental degradation is complex. On the one hand, it's created more industrialized nations spewing carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. On the other, it's promoted pressure on all countries to reduce their carbon emissions. Let's think about an example that highlights what I just shared. Bangladesh doubled its rice production from the year 1980 to the year 2000. In the 60s and 70s, they found that their normal planting schedule during the monsoon period of heavy rains was challenged due to irregular weather patterns, which wiped out crops. So they used to try to plant regular patterns throughout the year, but with these new heavy rains and these irregular weather patterns, their crops were all dying. At the same time, microcredit became available, which farmers used to purchase water pumps so that they could plant in the non-monsoon season by pumping groundwater to irrigate rice fields, thus increasing their yields. So now they didn't just have to plant during the monsoon season, they could actually plant during the dry, hot summers using these new pumps that they purchased through microcredit loans. However, rice farming thus displaced vegetable farming during that season, which resulted in much reduced vegetable production, causing micronutrient deficiencies in the Bangladeshi diet. It also depleted underground water resources and increased arsenic concentrations in their drinking water. So now the rice that we get from Bangladesh, and I'm sure you've seen this in the media, has arsenic in it, poisonous arsenic in the rice, because they had to drill deeper and deeper to access water in the lower levels because they're trying to harvest during the dry season. So that's an example of the impact on the world with climate change. So now let's look at our next driver, which is called weapons of mass destruction. This is kind of gloomy. We've broken weapons of mass destruction into 4 sub-issues: nuclear, chemical, biological, and cyber. And we'll explore each of these in the next few slides. The main concern here is the potential for a dirty bomb, which is highly radioactive materials. Dirty bomb. Radioactive material that is detonated so that it spreads out using convention explosives. You could contaminate a very large area mass, which could make a significant portion of a city unusable for many years. If we looked at, for instance, New York City, wow, if there were a dirty bomb that were exploded, what would be the impact? Well, here we are. This is the map of Central Park in New York City. And this was something I found in the paper, in the newspaper. Manhattan is a potential dirty bomb target. That is frightening. And this article highlighted how dangerous this could be, depending on where the dirty bomb was detonated. And here it was detonated in the south, on the lower part of this image, down near Wall Street, and how it would impact the entire island of Manhattan. So it's frightening. Black market Cesium-137. The biggest concern here is that fissionable radioactive material may be smuggled out of the former Soviet Union and, unfortunately, sold to potential terrorists. The article you're viewing here on the screen is an example of an individual who was trying to smuggle cesium across the border, but they were intercepted by the Turks. There's not been much confirmation that this was going to terrorists, but there is certainly the potential. Once again, frightening. I hate this section of our presentation. It's so scary. Now let's explore potential chemical weapons of mass destruction. VX agents. This is a lethal nerve agent. Sarin gas, an extremely potent nerve agent, the most toxic and rapidly acting. And taboon, another extremely toxic man-made nerve agent that can poison water very quickly. And finally, mustard gas. Originally used during World War I, it causes a severe burning of the skin, eyes, and respiratory tract. You may all recall the Tokyo subway attack, Tokyo, Japan, in 1995. Sarin gas was used in this attack, and this is an article from this outbreak, or this attack in Tokyo. And we also have the issue of chemical weapons having been used in Syria. We've all heard this. In 2012, President Obama drew the red line in the sand in Syria, and the chemical weapon issue, they were not allowed to use chemical weapons. Well, in March 2013, in violation of the International Chemical Weapons Convention, Syria used chemical weapons against its population. And in October 2013, the removal process of chemical weapons in Syria began. It's done now, but these are some articles from the impact of these horrible chemical weapons that were released in Syria. We'll now discuss the biologic weapons of mass destruction, focusing on anthrax, ricin, XDR-TB, and H5N1. First, let's explore anthrax, and I presented a visual here on the screen of how anthrax works. Anthrax is a serious infectious disease caused by gram-positive rod-shaped bacteria known as Bacillus anthracis. Most forms are lethal. Anthrax can only be used as a weapon of mass destruction if it's atomized. That means if it's made into a very fine powder to circulate in the air. And this is very difficult to achieve. Scientists have come very close to doing this. The last use of anthrax was mailed to many government employees. It was sent in the mail to congressmen, and it was found to have been significantly powderized. This helped to identify who created this mailed bomb, I'll call it, and who created it, since only a few labs in the United States can actually do this, can actually powderize anthrax. So it's not something that is easy to do, but it certainly can be done. Now let's look at ricin. We discussed ricin earlier in the presentation under the infectious diseases. Ricin is a poison found naturally in castor beans. If castor beans are chewed and swallowed, they release ricin. It can also be processed on a much larger scale to produce a deadly poison that can pollute reservoirs. Scary. And this was apparent in a Georgia attack, which is the article I've highlighted on the screen. In Georgia, the number of older men wanted to use ricin to poison the water supply. They were apprehended, of course. This was back in 2011. But they did do it. And we also have XDR-TB, which we have discussed earlier in this presentation under the infectious disease section. XDR-TB can be used as a weapon by potential terrorists. They would not even have to pass through security in the airport. Think about this. All they'd have to do is just stand in the check-in line or in the elevator at the airport. Let's see a big one in New York or New Jersey. They just stand in the check-in line or on the elevator and cough and cough and cough to spread this disease globally. A terrorist could focus on, let's say, 3 international airports, looking at Honolulu, JFK in New York, and Los Angeles Airport, and they could spread it globally in a matter of days. Or they could potentially target the domestic United States and focus on Atlanta, O'Hare in Chicago, LaGuardia in New York, or some of our more busier airports in the US. And we'll explore this concept again in a future slide with a model created by MIT graduate students. H5N1, or bird flu, is another potential threat, as we discussed earlier in this presentation. These are 2 articles highlighting the use of H5N1 in a negative manner. It is so easy to spread. This is the MIT graduate student simulation slide we alluded to earlier. If you go to this website here, you can actually watch the simulation real time. But it was a new model of disease contagion ranks U.S. airports in terms of their spreading influence. How quickly this could spread throughout the entire world by just targeting these 3 airports. They modeled this out. And I wanted to include this fun slide, and we'll revisit it again in the semester when we study infectious diseases. This is a game that you could actually play. The goal is for you to create a deadly global pathogen that you can use to infect and wipe out the world. This is the website here, the HTTP. It's MINICLIP.com. It's the play game. Try it and send me a note on how successful you were at infecting the world. Frightening. Now we'll focus on cyber attacks, beginning with Stuxnet, S-T-U-X-N-E-T. Have you ever heard of Stuxnet? Stuxnet was a computer virus aimed at one specific Hewlett-Packard computer that controlled centrifuges in an Iranian nuclear facility. United States cyber warriors undertook a steal attack that was never supposed to be traced back to the United States, to attack the centrifuges in Iran with a virus that was to be hidden from detection and was to make the centrifuges that were enriching uranium run at very, very fast speeds to the point where they would destroy themselves. It was determined from international computer experts that it was so sophisticated that only either the United States or Israel could have undertaken it. This attack was quite successful and set back the Iranian program by several months or more. So this was called Stuxnet. And we don't know the final details, but we believe either us, the United States, or Israel was behind it. Following Stuxnet, we also attacked Iran's power grids that serve those uranium facilities. Now let's look at power grids, government systems, financial systems, New York Times, etc. So we have 3 power grids in the U.S., the East Coast, West Coast, and Texas. They've been accessed repeatedly and attacked on a number of occasions, but we've been able to manage the issues well in the past thus far. This is a big area of future concern. Ted Koppel wrote a really good, scary book which highlights this. Attacks on the United States power grids can be devastating to us because power grid repairs take a very long time to actually complete. For instance, a successful hit to one of our power grids controlling our water and electricity would be devastating to the United States. Imagine no water, no sewage, no electricity for months and months. Imagine how that would absolutely stop an entire area of the country. Now we'll focus on government systems. Government systems, for example, the Office of Personnel Management computers was recently attacked. Financial systems like banks, they've definitely been hacked many times in the past, and the New York Times was hacked as well. We should all be concerned with potential health cyber attacks as we become more and more digital with e-medical records. With this, our sensitive data is vulnerable to attack. So think about that. If a terrorist was able to hack into hospital data, how crazy that would be. And along those lines, in 2012, Leon Panetta, our former CIA director from 2009 through 2011 and later, the defense secretary, said that the next Pearl Harbor will be a cyber attack. So we've got to watch out for, as we've seen, there have been many smaller cyber attacks, but a big one could really hit us back. So as we've discussed, weapons of mass destruction is a very powerful driver. The four sub-issues we focused on included nuclear, chemical, biological, and cyber attacks. We can now link weapons of mass destruction to our other 6 drivers. Weapons of mass destruction are clearly linked to water. We saw how ricin was going to be used to poison the water supply, remember, with the old folks from Georgia? And climate change, well, there's no direct relationship. However, if the rest of the world is happening and that is hurting them, but Americans don't believe that climate change is not real, then the world will think that the U.S. does not care about them, like Bangladesh. Why should they not place a bomb on a U.S. plane? If we don't care about the Pacific Islanders whose land is sinking as we speak into the ocean, then why should they care about us? So if we don't believe that climate change is actually occurring, then those countries, those nations that are being impacted by climate change will be very upset, and they could be upset at us. Infectious diseases, well, we've seen the clear link to bioweapons like MDR-TB. And we saw how weapons of mass destruction could cause such issues in lower Manhattan that we could not live there for decades. This was that map schema we looked in New York City, if there were a dirty bomb placed in Manhattan. And for demographics, well, demographics would cause people to move or to migrate. And then weapons of mass destruction and the link to environmental degradation is what will make fissionable materials available to potential terrorists. Scary. And we're going to pause here as we move to our next and final driver.